Again, now we're at a point where we want to try to apply things that we've already learned, or hopefully we've already learned. And so we want to talk specifically about externalities. All right, we need to define externalities. We already did this, but it was a while ago, and it doesn't hurt us for us to do it again. An externality is a cost or benefit that falls on someone other than the person, business, or government that made a choice. Okay, there's somebody who comes to class every day in the non-social distancing era. That person they go to the gym right before they come to class, they don't shower, they sit down next to you. They made a choice. They got here without having to go shower. That meant there was an advantage to them for doing it. The fact that they're sitting next to you right now after having worked out for a couple hours is a disadvantage to you. You're getting an externality. They made a choice. You're paying a cost. It's an externality. Technically, there's two basic brands of externalities, and then there's more detailed brands. But if it's a benefit, if something happens to you which is good for you, that's an externality, a benefit, an external benefit. If something happens that's bad to you, that externality is an external cost. So there can be good and bad externalities, right? Somebody can, sit next to you and say mumbling something during a test, and you go, oh, yeah, and you get it, and now you got an extra answer. That's an external benefit. Okay, so in detail, your book wants to break these out into 4 different versions. So negative production externalities and positive production externalities. Those two externalities come from the production of something. So if a factory is creating pollution, that's a negative production externality. If that factory creates a byproduct and that byproduct is a positive, that's a positive production externality. If it's a consumption problem, consumption can create a positive externality or a negative externality. So somebody does something, they clear junk out of the way, and then you get to walk down the sidewalk and you don't have to do it. That's a positive consumption externality. If they're breathing on you and you don't want them to breathe on you and they're not intentionally breathing on you, they're just talking to their neighbor, that's a negative consumption externality. Okay? The trick to externalities, the really trick to understand them is that when externalities exist, the private cost paid by the individuals and the social cost, the cost paid by all of society, are different. In regular old supply and demand, with no externalities, regular old supply and demand, the benefits for society are the same as the benefits for everybody. So everybody's involved in the transaction who's in that market. Everybody gets the same benefit, pays the same cost. There's the sum of those producer and consumer surpluses. That shows us where the private and social costs are. When there's an externality, those two deviate from each other. So you're driving down the road, one other person gets on the road, they're coming the other way. There's no deviation between private and social cost. You're doing your thing, they're doing their thing, you're not interfering with each other. Each of you is paying the private cost of being out on that road, time and gas and whatever, and neither one of you creates a cost for the other. On the freeway, though, you drive on the freeway, people get on that freeway when it's crowded, or when it's even not all that crowded, but they get on and they travel a different speed than everybody else, or they decide they want to change lanes. In LA, you wait till the very last second and then you come across 4 lanes. Even if you make all 3 other lanes come to a dead stop so you can come across, that's what they do in LA. Well, there's a social cost in that. If I want to exit the freeway and I travel through all 4 lanes and I stick my nose in and I make everybody else stop, I pay my private cost of how much time it gets me across and blah, blah, blah. But 300 cars, maybe literally 300 cars came to a dead stop so I could make that maneuver. I have created a social cost for all those people. I don't have to pay it. I'm off the freeway. I'm zipping off to where I'm going. They're all spending extra time, even if it's a few extra seconds of extra time, out on the freeway because of you. If you made all these people slam on their brakes and 100 people took an extra 5 seconds, that's 500 seconds. That's 8 minutes of their time you just wasted. Okay? So private cost and social cost. Private cost and social cost. If you take an empty lot next to your house and turn it into a beautiful park and let the neighbors come play, the private cost is what you paid to do that. The fact the whole neighborhood benefits is a social cost. So the social cost could be bigger than the private cost, or it could be littler than the private cost. You are asking this question. I am sure that in your mind you are asking the question, how do I graph this? Yes? Because that's the first thing you think. Yes? Yeah. So, there's 3 parts to this. Remember that supply and demand is really marginal cost and marginal benefit. So we're going to want to graph these externalities in terms of marginal costs and marginal benefits. On the graph, we have marginal private cost. That's the cost that you paid for getting off the freeway, your exit of the freeway. The marginal external cost is the cost that you gave to everybody else. So the sum of those is the marginal social cost, which is the cost that you paid and the cost that you made everybody else pay. Okay? So marginal private cost plus marginal external cost equals the marginal social cost. We hope that that marginal external cost is 0. In a normally, properly functioning market, that marginal external cost should be 0, so marginal private cost equals marginal social cost. Okay? It should be 0. So if we draw this, we have, this is what should be, yes? This is the way the world should be. We have marginal social cost, marginal benefit there, meeting beautifully at equilibrium like they're supposed to. We get an equilibrium price and quantity. In this graph, private cost is equal to the social cost. Okay, let me say that again. In these normal graphs that just look like that, the private cost is equal to the social cost. This is optimal. This is the way the world should look. But it's not the way the world is. Okay? So let's suppose that we figure out a way to pass some of our costs on to society. So again, we're going to cut across 4 lanes of traffic to get off the freeway. We're going to make each one of those lanes come to a dead stop so we can get to that freeway across those 4 lanes in 30 feet. We have just made life easier for us, but we passed costs on to the rest of society. So you have this marginal social cost and marginal benefit, but the private cost is lower than the social cost. I'm paying the private cost, right? All I did was zip across that freeway, and there was a few honky horns, and it might have bothered me, and I had to, go slow across. It took me longer than I wish it had, but I make it across. Okay? All the people behind me, they gave up time and effort and they screwed up their brakes because I made them stop. So what do we have here? The little red line. Do you see the little red line? The little red line is what? It's marginal external cost. So where the green line is, that's the private cost. Where the purple line is the societal cost. And the red part in between is the marginal external cost. Now, do we notice something about where we're going to end up? Okay, if this is benefits and costs of lane changes, when I can pass some of the cost of that lane change off to everybody else, I'm going to change lanes more often. So with that externality happening, I'm going to produce more. We're going to have too many lane changes. If everybody would just stop these idiots from making those lane changes, make the social cost equal to the private cost, then people would do fewer of them. But because everybody else goes, oh, I don't know, and you let that guy go across, now they've separated the private cost and the social cost. The private cost is lower than the social cost. And because of that, they're going to make too many lane changes. Okay? If polluters don't have to pay the cost of their pollution, they're going to pollute more. All right? A simple way to think of that. So we also have, and there's a missing line. A missing line. I don't like missing lines, but there's a missing line. So the price that I have to pay to make those lane changes is lower than it should be. Okay? I should have to pay the cost of having to make that last second lane change. And of course, I would never do this. I am not that kind of person. I get over and make the correct lane change. But these people who make these bizarre, wild LA lane changes, they are paying a lower cost because they are passing some of that cost on to other people who have to slow down, slam on their brakes, come to a stop, whatever. Okay? Causing accidents behind them, and they don't have to pay the cost of those accidents. All right? Do we get that? We're producing too much. Remember that. There is a negative externality here, right? A negative externality. Society is paying more than the private cost. There's a negative externality, and because of that, we're producing too much of this thing. We should be producing less. Okay? If there's a factory that's polluting, its optimal production level is less than what it's actually doing. Okay? There's a deadweight loss in this, right? And it's that little triangle there. So the little blue triangle, that little blue triangle is a deadweight loss. Society is worse off, right? Because of this. So again, it is Pareto optimal. Remember our buddy Pareto. It is Pareto optimal for us to get rid of this problem, because getting rid of this problem means we can make everybody better off without making anybody worse off. Right? All right. So again, private and social costs diverge in these examples because there's a negative externality. Because of the negative externality, prices are too low. And because the prices are too low, the quantities that we produce are too high. The externality creates inefficiency. If everybody had to pay the true cost of what they do, prices would be higher, quantities would be lower, and the market would be efficient. But the market is inefficient because of the externality, because prices are too low and quantities are too high. Ooh, so this funky looking guy, I was about to say is, but he's been dead for a long time, is Arthur Cecil Pigou, A.C. Pigou. A.C. Pigou is the guy who developed the modern theory of the externality. It's not that we didn't know about him before, or even if you read Adam Smith, he didn't call him that, but you can see the idea in The Wealth of Nations. So they've been around a long time, but the person who really wrote the book on externalities, the original book, it's been altered since, but the original book is A.C. Pigou. And he says what you have to do when you have an externality is internalize the externality. You like that phrase? It's a pretty good phrase. Internalize the externality. In other words, if I'm making that lane change and I'm creating that cost, the way to stop me from making that lane change is to make me internalize everybody else's cost, to pay the true cost of what I do. Your mom's told you that for years, right? You need to take responsibility for what you do. You need to pay the costs of your actions. That's internalize the externality.